Hello, in this video we are going to do Judy's magic cast on. And if you look here at my knitting, this is the start of a toe that I've taken off the needles. And we actually started it right here in the very middle of it, but it just looks like a line of knitting. So that's what Judy's magic cast on will do. It's a little tricky, so I'm going to walk you through step by step, nice and slowly. And we'll see if we can get the hang of it here. So you start with your circular needle. This is a circular needle. I'm going to be doing this with the magic loop method, so we're going to learn the magic loop later in the video as well. You start with your 2 needle points pointing towards the left, and you're just going to hold them parallel to each other, and you're not going to flip them back and forth ever. You're always going to hold them like this. So if you put your thumb on top and keep your thumb there, that's how it's going to work. You don't have to hold them apart, just hold them right straight beside each other. Now, to get started, you have your yarn, and here's my tail. So I'm going to drape the yarn so that my tail is between the needles, and the yarn comes over the back needle towards the ball. So I have my tail hanging between the needles. I'm going to make it a little bigger because this is a kind of a long tail cast on. And when I say that, I mean that we're going to use the tail as part of the cast on. So make sure you give yourself at least 12 inches for working a sock toe. So there, I'm making mine nice and big. Now what you're going to do is you're going to bring that tail to the back on the right side of the working yarn. So working yarn is on the left and the tail is going to go towards the right, and we're going to rearrange it so that it is at the back. There. And now I'm going to move my ball of yarn, over here. Okay, so my tail is at the back, my working yarn is at the front, and I'm going to hold this like I hold for the long tail cast on. I'll put my finger and thumb between the 2 strands so that the tail is over my finger and the working yarn is over my thumb, and I'm just tensioning them in my little fingers there. Okay, so now I have space to work, and I'm just going to move that tail out of the way so you can see more clearly. Alright, so what we're going to do is, we actually already have 1 stitch here. This is part of our cast on. It's not secured in any way, it's only there because my fingers are holding it in place. Now, I have 1 stitch on my top needle. I'm going to call this the top needle, and this the bottom needle. And then I also have a top yarn here on my finger, and that's the tail, and the bottom yarn here on my thumb, and that's attached to the ball of yarn. So to load a stitch on the bottom needle, I'm going to use the opposite yarn, so the top yarn. And then to load a stitch on the top needle, I'll always use the bottom yarn coming off my thumb. So we're going to start by putting a stitch on the bottom needle. So we'll reach up. We're just going to rotate back and forth the needles as if they're the hands of a clock. So they're never going to flip like this, never, never. They're always going to stay straight, parallel to each other, with the thumb holding them together. So I'm just going to swing my needles up past that top strand of yarn, and then I'm going to scoop the yarn with the bottom needle so that it starts from outside the needle and goes between the 2 needles. And then I've scooped 1 stitch on the bottom needle. So I have 2, and that makes 1 pair. With Judy's magic cast on, we always cast on in pairs for a sock. So this side will be the half of your sock that will form, say, the instep, and then these stitches will be the half that form your sole. So we're casting on for both sides, both halves of the sock at the same time in pairs. So now I need a stitch on my top needle, so I'm going to reach down and I'm going to scoop the yarn with my top needle from between. I'll bring the yarn between the 2 needles and just scoop it up and over the top needle and put my thumb back in place. And now it's time to get a stitch for the bottom needle. So we're going to swing it up and scoop the yarn so that it comes from the bottom outside towards the middle between the needles. Now we'll reach down to get a stitch for the top needle from the middle and up. and put your fingers back in place. So this is the neutral position in the middle here. So now I have 3 stitches on the top and 2 stitches on the bottom. So I'm missing one in my pair. So it's time to load another stitch on the bottom needle. So I'm going to reach up all the way past the top yarn so that I can scoop it from the outside towards the inside. And then I'm going to reach down and scoop it from the inside up towards the outside. Reach up all the way past and scoop that stitch from the outside towards the inside. So now I have 4 pairs. And you can always tell which stitch you did last by which is at the leftmost. So the leftmost stitch now is on the bottom needle. So I know automatically that I have 4 completed pairs. And it's time to put one on the top needle. So I'm going to top, so I scoop down to the bottom strand of yarn, put it between the needles, up and over, and done. And then up past the yarn completely, and scoop that yarn on from the outside in towards the middle of the needles. Okay, so now if you'll notice, my yarn isn't secured at all back here. It's going to feel, the only thing keeping this stitch in place are my fingers and the tension they're giving to the yarn. So don't worry, it's completely supposed to be like that. It does mean that you can't just set this down and go answer the phone in the middle of casting on, because everything will get loose and you'll probably lose a stitch when you come back, unless you set it down very carefully like I just did. And then see, so I don't want to lose that. I'll put my fingers back in and re-tension the yarn. Alright, so we're going to finish up here with one more pair. So I have my leftmost stitches on the bottom needle, so that's done. So it's time for a top needle stitch. So putting it down to the bottom yarn, between the needles and up. There's one. Rotate it up from the outside and in. And done. Okay, now let's say that's all that I need. So it's unsecured back here. So what you're going to do is you're going to give the yarn a twist, at least this one time. There. And that's actually enough. And now we're ready to start knitting. So I have my tail here. I'm still holding the yarn. I'm not just going to let it go because it will loosen and unravel. And I'm going to pinch it to keep everything in place. And I'm going to rotate the needles around like the hands of a clock so that they're pointing towards the right. And now what I want to find is my working yarn. So this is my tail. I'm going to get it out of the way, but I'm going to still hold on to it. Okay, and this is the yarn I'm going to be knitting with. To start knitting, I want the right side facing me. At this point, the right side just looks like stitches on the needle. And if you turn it around on the back side, it actually looks like purl bumps because we've made a row of knitting in there. So that's the wrong side of your work. You always want it facing away from you with the right side that looks just like stitches facing you. It does have knit stitches in there right now, but they're hard to see unless you really spread things apart. Okay, normally it just looks like that. Alright, so here's my working yarn. With the right side facing me, I'm going to be knitting these stitches on the top needle first. And now I need a needle that I can knit them with, and I happen to have one handy right here. So I'm still holding onto the yarn and needles with my left hand, and I'm going to pull out this needle until the cable's long enough that I can use it to knit with. So now I have a loop here on my left, and I have a loop here on my right that I can knit with. So I'll get the tail out of the way. It's still twisted together there, but it's not very secure until I knit that first stitch. So I'm going to knit it. Here we go. Good. And I'm just going to knit my way across those stitches on the top needle. And I'm going to give the yarn a tug after working the first 2 stitches so that there won't be any gaps here at the edges. So look, that looks neat, doesn't it? So we're going to knit our way across. And now, there we go, I have knit half the stitches. So half the round is complete. We are knitting in the round, but it's not very round right now. It just looks like a nice rectangle or a caterpillar with legs on both sides. Alright, so what I want to do now is continue working in the round and knitting on these stitches. So in order to get them ready for working, I'm going to rearrange my needles. Let's see, actually, here, I'll rotate it first, and I'm going to pull this so that my needle tip is in place and ready to knit these stitches. There are the ones I just made. And now, like before, I'm going to pull this needle out, the bottom needle, so that I'll be able to knit with it. Now have a look. I still have the right side facing me. There's the knit stitches. I still want the purl side facing away from me. And there's my tail. So with the right side facing and the needles in position, I can pick up my working yarn and knit across these stitches. So I'm going to knit the first two, and then I'm going to give the working yarn a tug so I don't have any gaps at that side, and I'm going to knit across. There we are. And I've made one whole round of knit stitches. So I'm going to rearrange my needles. You can rearrange them and then rotate them, or you can rotate them and then rearrange them, but remember you're always turning them this way, like the hands of a clock. Okay, and one way I know that I'm back at the beginning of my round is that I have my tail there coming off of that side.